They say the most terrifying sound in the world is silence. Not gunfire. Not screaming. Not even the final breath of a dying man. Silence. And on the night the heir of the most feared crime empire was born, silence filled the room. The hospital's private wing had been cleared hours before delivery. Armed men stood outside every entrance. Elevators were locked. Surveillance cameras streamed directly to a secure control room. No one entered. No one left. Because inside that room was the only son of the most powerful underworld boss the city had ever known. A man whose name wasn't spoken, only whispered. He had built an empire from blood and betrayal. Judges feared him. Politicians owed him. Entire neighborhoods survived because he allowed it. And now he had a son, an heir, a legacy carved in flesh and bone. But when the child was born, he did not cry. The doctors waited. 1 second. 5 seconds. 10. The room grew tight with panic. A newborn always cries. It's instinct. It's survival. It's life announcing itself. But this child simply stared. Wide, dark eyes open. Unblinking. Silent. The machines beeped steadily. Heartbeat normal. Oxygen stable. Medically perfect. Yet something felt wrong. The boss stood in the corner of the delivery room, silent as stone. His tailored black suit looked untouched by the chaos around him. His hands didn't tremble. His breathing didn't shift. But his eyes were locked on the child. Waiting. Demanding. The head doctor cleared his throat. Sometimes babies take a moment. The boss raised one finger. The doctor stopped talking. The seconds stretched into something suffocating. Still no cry. One of the nurses gently stimulated the baby's back. Nothing. Another tried adjusting the blanket. Nothing. The room, once filled with urgency, now felt watched. And then something strange happened. The baby's gaze shifted. Not toward his mother. Not toward the doctors. Toward the door. Toward the men standing guard outside. His tiny fingers curled into a fist. But he didn't cry. A murmur began spreading among the staff in the following hours. He's cursed. He's in shock. He can't feel. By midnight, rumors had already escaped the hospital walls and slipped into the underworld like poison. The heir doesn't cry. Inside the empire, silence meant danger. Silence meant calculation. Silence meant someone was about to disappear. The boss remained at the hospital long after his wife was sedated. He stood beside the crib in the dim light of the private suite. Watching. Studying. The baby lay awake. Still silent. It unsettled him in a way bullets never had. He had seen men beg. He had seen rivals break. He had heard enemies scream as they realized mercy would never come. But this was different. A child who did not announce himself to the world. A child who did not demand air with a cry. It felt unnatural. As if the boy wasn't entering the empire, but observing it. That's when she entered. The night shift nurse. Her uniform was slightly worn. Her shoes cheap. No jewelry. No power. Invisible. She wasn't supposed to be assigned to this wing, but the head nurse had called in sick. Or perhaps someone had arranged it that way. She moved quietly, checking vitals without looking directly at the boss. Most staff avoided eye contact. She didn't. Not disrespectfully. Just calmly. She studied the baby for a long moment. Then she noticed something no one else had. The baby wasn't unfocused. He wasn't blank. He was alert. Listening. The nurse stepped slightly to the side. The baby's eyes followed. She leaned closer. His breathing shifted. Not into panic. Into awareness. You've all been trying to make him cry, she said softly, breaking the heavy silence. No one had spoken to the boss so directly in years. The guard stiffened. But he didn't stop her. And his voice was low, controlled. She hesitated only slightly. Maybe he's not scared enough. The room went cold. One guard took a step forward. The boss raised his hand again. Silence. The nurse slowly extended her finger toward the baby's palm. Not forceful. Not rushed. Gentle. The moment her skin touched his, the baby's fingers tightened around her. The first real reaction since birth. And then, His eyes moved again. Not to her. Past her. To the doorway. His tiny chest expanded sharply, and for a split second, his face twisted. Not like a normal newborn cry, but like recognition. As if he had just seen something familiar. Something threatening. The nurse felt it too. A shift in the air. One of the boss's most trusted lieutenants had just stepped into the room. The baby's grip tightened. His body trembled. Still no cry. But fear, unmistakable fear. The boss slowly turned toward his lieutenant, a man who had stood beside him for 20 years. Through wars. Through betrayals. Through executions. The lieutenant smiled faintly. Everything all right? The baby's monitor spiked. Beep, beep, beep. Faster. The nurse looked at the boss. The boss looked at his son. For the first time in his life, uncertainty flickered across his face. The heir of the crime empire had not cried at birth. He had not cried for doctors. He had not cried for strangers. But now, in the presence of one specific man, his entire body reacted, and he stared at the doorway, like he recognized danger. The nurse swallowed, because suddenly this wasn't about a silent child anymore. It was about what the child knew. And in the underworld, knowledge was more deadly than bullets. The boss stepped closer to the crib. His voice was calm. Too calm. Leave us. The lieutenant hesitated. Just for a second. And that second was enough. The baby's breathing quickened again. Still silent. Still watching. And somewhere deep in the corridors of the hospital, something had just shifted inside the empire. Because if a newborn heir could sense betrayal, then someone very close to the throne had already made a fatal mistake. Fade to black. Fear has a scent. Most men in the underworld learn to hide it. They bury it beneath expensive suits, steady voices, and loaded weapons. But fear never truly disappears. And somehow, the child could smell it. The hospital wing had transformed overnight. More guards. More cameras. More silence. Word had spread quietly inside the crime empire. The heir reacts to certain people. No one said the word betrayal. Not yet. But everyone was thinking it. The lieutenant returned the next morning. He walked with the same measured confidence he had carried for 2 decades beside the boss. He had survived gang wars, federal raids, assassination attempts. His loyalty had never been questioned. Until now. The nurse stood near the crib, reviewing vitals. The baby was awake, calm, unnervingly still. The moment the lieutenant stepped into the room, the air shifted. The baby's fingers curled. His breathing changed. Then it happened. A sharp, violent cry tore through the silence. It wasn't the weak wail of a newborn. It was raw, piercing, almost angry. Every guard in the hallway stiffened. Inside the room, the boss froze. Because this was the first true cry his son had ever made. And it was directed at one man. The lieutenant stopped mid-step. The baby's tiny face flushed red, fists trembling, body shaking with distress. The nurse quickly checked the monitors. Heart rate elevated. Oxygen stable. No medical explanation. The lieutenant forced a tight smile. He's just being a baby. But his voice had changed. Slightly. Almost unnoticeable. Unless you were listening carefully. The nurse was. The boss stepped forward slowly. Pick him up. It wasn't a request. The lieutenant hesitated only a fraction of a second. But in the underworld, hesitation is confession. He approached the crib. The baby's cries escalated into something almost desperate. The nurse felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. The lieutenant reached down and lifted the child. The crying became hysterical. The kind of cry that speaks of danger. Of warning. The boss watched closely. The lieutenant held the baby awkwardly, jaw tight, eyes flickering toward the guards as if suddenly aware of how this looked. "See," he muttered. "He's fine." The baby suddenly stopped crying. Dead silence. Too fast. Too unnatural. The room felt suffocated. The baby stared up at the lieutenant's face. Not with confusion. Not with innocence. But with something else. Recognition. The nurse stepped closer, her voice low. "Give him to me." The lieutenant didn't move. For 2 long seconds. Then the boss's voice cut through the room. Now. The lieutenant handed the baby over. The moment the nurse took him, the child's body relaxed. Breathing steadied. No more tears. The room fell into a thick, heavy quiet. The boss didn't speak for a long time. He simply observed. Then finally, leave us. The lieutenant's jaw tightened. You think I would ever? I said leave. The guards shifted subtly, hands near their weapons. The lieutenant gave one last look at the baby. And for the first time in 20 years, there was something in his eyes. Not loyalty. Not anger. Fear. He walked out. The door closed. Inside the room, only 3 remained. The boss, the nurse, and the silent Heir. The boss turned slowly toward her. Explain. She chose her words carefully. One wrong sentence could end her life. He doesn't react randomly, she said. It's specific. It's consistent. To what? She hesitated. Stress. The boss's eyes narrowed. Not loud noise. Not touch. Not light. He reacts to stress. The boss said nothing. He cried when your lieutenant entered. His breathing changed before the man even spoke. You're suggesting my son can sense betrayal? I'm suggesting he can sense fear. The word hung in the air like smoke. Fear. The most dangerous weakness in the empire. The boss walked to the window, overlooking the city he controlled. What kind of fear? The nurse swallowed. The kind someone carries when they've done something they can't undo. Silence. Heavy. Calculating. You understand, the boss said quietly, that if you're wrong, there will be consequences. I know. And if you're right? She didn't answer. Because if she was right, the consequences would be far worse. Suddenly, the baby stirred again. But this time, there was no crying. Only alertness. The nurse noticed something else. Every time certain names were mentioned in the room, certain territories, certain shipments, the baby's heartbeat shifted. Subtle, but measurable. It was as if the child wasn't just sensing fear. He was reacting to secrets. The boss's phone vibrated. A message from internal security. There had been a financial transfer weeks ago. Unexplained. Linked to someone inside his inner circle. The lieutenant's name appeared. The boss stared at the screen. Then at his son. The baby's eyes were locked on him now. Watching. Almost waiting. Find everything, the boss ordered into the phone. Every call. Every movement. I want the truth. He ended the call. The nurse looked down at the child. You're not afraid, she whispered softly. You're warning him. The boss heard that. And for the first time in his ruthless life, he felt something unfamiliar. Not in his enemies. Not in his empire. But in the man who had stood beside him for 20 years. Outside the hospital, black cars began arriving quietly. Inside the empire, whispers were turning into fractures. Because if the Heir could recognize fear, then someone very close to power was already terrified. And terrified men make desperate decisions. Fade to black. Every empire is built on secrets. But the most dangerous secrets are the ones buried before a child is even born. The hospital no longer felt like a place of healing. It felt like a fortress under siege. Armed guards lined the corridors. Phones were confiscated. Background checks were reopened. Every member of the medical staff was being re-examined by the boss's private security team. And at the center of it all, a newborn who only cried at one man. The nurse hadn't slept in 20 hours. Not because she was afraid, but because something inside her refused to ignore the pattern. She stood alone in the records room, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. On the screen in front of her were files from the night of the birth. Vitals. Shift changes. Security timestamps. And something didn't add up. There, she whispered to herself, between 2:17 a.m. and 2:29 a.m., 12 minutes of missing surveillance footage outside the delivery wing. Deleted. Not corrupted. Removed. Her pulse quickened. She pulled up access logs. Only 3 people had clearance high enough to override hospital security that night. The hospital director. The head of security. and someone with an external override code. A code tied to a private network. The same private network used by the crime empire. She leaned back slowly. Why would the empire erase footage on the night the heir was born? Unless something happened that wasn't supposed to be seen. Meanwhile, upstairs in the private suite, the boss stood over his son's crib. The baby was awake, silent, watching the room like a quiet judge. The boss had ordered a discreet internal investigation into the lieutenant's finances. What came back disturbed him. 2 weeks before the birth, there had been a large transfer routed through shell accounts. Destination, unknown. But the timing? It aligned perfectly with another piece of intelligence that had just resurfaced. An assassination attempt. Weeks before his son was born, there had been a sniper positioned across from one of his safe houses. The attempt failed. The shooter disappeared. The incident had been reported to him as random, unconnected, handled. Now he wasn't so sure. What if it hadn't been about him? What if the target had been his unborn child? A knock interrupted his thoughts. The nurse stepped in. She looked pale but steady. "I need to show you something," she said. The guards glanced at the boss. He nodded. She placed a tablet in his hands. Missing footage. Security override logs. Time stamps. The boss's expression didn't change. But his silence deepened. "Who else knows?" he asked. "No one." "And you're certain?" "Yes." He studied her for a long moment. "You understand what you're implying?" "Yes. That someone inside my circle tampered with hospital security the night my son was born." "Yes." The room felt colder. The baby shifted in the crib. His eyes moved slowly between them, almost aware. "There's more," she said quietly. She pulled up another file. A nurse assignment change made just hours before delivery. The original assigned nurse had been replaced. The replacement authorization had come through an encrypted line. The encryption traced back to the Empire's private network. The boss felt something rare stir in his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Calculation. Someone had manipulated hospital staff. Someone had erased footage. Someone had moved money weeks before an assassination attempt. And his son, his silent, watchful son, had reacted violently to only one man. The lieutenant. "Bring him," the boss ordered softly. Downstairs, the lieutenant was already aware something was shifting. 2 guards had repositioned outside his temporary office. Conversations stopped when he walked by. He could feel it. Suspicion. He entered the suite without waiting to be called. "You wanted to see me." The boss didn't turn. Instead, he spoke while looking at the city skyline. "Where were you between 2:17 and 2:29 a.m. the night my son was born?" The question landed like a bullet. The lieutenant's face didn't flinch. "In the hallway. Waiting. Security footage says otherwise." The pause. "Footage can be corrupted." It wasn't corrupted. Silence. The baby stirred. The nurse watched carefully. The lieutenant stepped closer to the crib, and instantly, the baby's breathing changed. Not crying this time, but rapid, blurred, as if preparing for something. The boss noticed. "You transferred money," he said calmly, "for operational expenses. 2 weeks before a sniper aimed at my property. That was handled." "Was it?" The lieutenant's jaw tightened. "You think I would betray you? After 20 years? The boss finally turned. Slowly. 20 years, he repeated. "In 20 years. I have never seen fear in your eyes." The room froze. The nurse's heart pounded. Because it was there now. But real. The lieutenant took a step back. "You're letting a child and a nurse poison your mind." Before the boss could respond, the lights flickered. Twice. Darkness. Emergency lights bathed the room in red. Alarms began to hum faintly through the corridor. The baby's monitor beeped rapidly. The nurse rushed to the crib. "He's still breathing." But when she looked down, her blood ran cold. Inside the crib, placed carefully beside the baby's blanket, was a small metallic token, engraved with a symbol belonging to a rival syndicate. A syndicate the boss had supposedly destroyed years ago. The boss stared at it. then slowly at the lieutenant. "No one enters this wing without my permission," he said quietly. The lieutenant's voice dropped. "You think I put that there?" The baby stopped moving, stopped reacting, completely still, watching both men, as if waiting to see who would move first. And in that crimson emergency light, one terrifying possibility settled into the room. Maybe the betrayal wasn't happening now. Maybe it had started long before the birth. Buried, planned, waiting, and the Heir had known. Fade to black. Empires don't fall from outside attacks. They fall when loyalty breaks from within. The emergency lights burned red across the hospital wing, turning white walls into the color of blood. Alarms hummed low, restrained, controlled panic, just like the man who ruled this empire. The boss didn't move. He stared at the metallic token lying inside his son's crib, a symbol from the past. A rival syndicate he had personally erased from existence. Or so he believed. The baby lay still beside it. Too still. The nurse's hands trembled as she checked the monitor again. Heartbeat steady. Breathing normal. Alive. But watching. Always watching. The lieutenant broke the silence first. "This is staged. Someone wants us to turn on each other." His voice was firm. Too firm. The boss finally spoke. Only 3 people could enter this wing tonight. His eyes lifted. "You. Me. And her." The nurse swallowed. "I didn't put that there," she said quickly. "I know," the boss replied. That answer hit the lieutenant harder than an accusation ever could. Because it meant the finger was no longer pointed outward. It was pointed inward. The boss gestured subtly. 2 guards stepped forward and took position behind the lieutenant. Not touching him. Not yet. Just close enough to be felt. "Interrogate every man who stepped foot on this floor tonight," the boss ordered calmly. Quietly. 1 guard nodded and disappeared into the corridor. The lieutenant laughed softly. "You're making a mistake." "Possibly," the boss said, "but I've survived longer by questioning loyalty than by trusting it." The baby stirred again. The nurse noticed something new. The child wasn't reacting to the tension anymore. He was reacting to decisions. When the boss spoke with authority, the baby's breathing slowed. When the lieutenant pushed back, it quickened, as if the child sensed balance shifting, power realigning. The lights flickered again. This time they didn't go out. The system stabilized. Someone had tested the wing. Not a blackout. A warning. Outside, cars were moving. Inside, whispers spread faster than orders. The Empire felt it. Something was wrong. Down in the underground parking garage, soldiers began to separate subtly. Men who once stood shoulder to shoulder now stood apart. Eyes watched each other. Hands hovered closer to weapons. Old alliances felt fragile. The boss's phone vibrated again. More reports. Encrypted messages intercepted. Unusual movements near old territories once owned by the dead syndicate. Someone was activating ghosts. Upstairs, the nurse stood alone with the baby while the boss stepped into a private side room with his security chief. "Someone wants chaos," the chief said. "They want you to doubt your own blood." The boss's eyes darkened. "My blood is the only thing I trust." Back in the nursery, the lieutenant paced slowly. "I've protected you since before you had this empire," he said, voice low. "I've taken bullets meant for you. And now you expect me to ignore the signs?" the boss replied. The lieutenant stopped pacing. "Signs can be planted." The baby suddenly let out a sharp cry. "Urgent." The nurse reacted instantly, scooping him up. The lieutenant had taken 1 step closer. The cry stopped once he stepped back. No one spoke. They didn't have to. The room understood. The boss looked at the nurse. "Take him." She hesitated. "Where?" "My safe house," he said. "The old one. No one knows it except me." The lieutenant's eyes widened slightly. "That place was compromised years ago." The boss cut him off with a raised hand. "That's exactly why." The nurse understood. If the enemy followed them there, it would confirm something terrifying. She gathered her courage and nodded. Guards began moving. Routes changed. Orders whispered. But the empire was too large. And fear moves faster than command. Somewhere in the city, a call was made. A code was spoken. A sleeping network stirred. The dead syndicate wasn't dead. It had been waiting. As the nurse prepared to leave, the lieutenant stepped closer to the boss. Lowered his voice. "If you do this," he said, "there's no going back." The boss met his gaze. "There never is." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. He leaned in. "You think that child is choosing sides. I think he already has." That hurt. The lieutenant straightened. "And if you're wrong?" The boss answered without hesitation. "Then I'll burn what's left of this empire myself." The nurse paused at the doorway. She looked down at the child in her arms. He wasn't crying. He wasn't calm either. He was focused, as if listening to something only he could hear. As she stepped into the corridor, a gunshot echoed somewhere below. Then another. Then shouting. The empire had felt the shift, and it was reacting. Back in the nursery, the lieutenant stood alone with the boss. Two men who had built an empire together, now standing on opposite sides of suspicion. The lieutenant finally spoke. "You're tearing everything apart." The boss replied quietly, "No. I'm exposing what's already broken." Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, loyalty fractured. And in the arms of a poor nurse, the silent heir was being carried toward a truth no one was ready to face. Because when loyalty breaks in the underworld, blood always follows. Fade to black. Blood never lies. Men do. Empires do. Loyalty does. But blood always tells the truth. The safe house sat at the edge of the city, abandoned on every official record. No guards in uniform. No visible cameras. Just silence and concrete. The nurse held the child tightly as the black SUV doors locked behind them. Gunfire still echoed faintly in the distance. The empire was tearing itself apart. Inside the safe house, the boss stood in the center of the empty room, phone pressed to his ear. "I want the full DNA report," he said quietly. "Not the summary. Everything." Across the city, the lieutenant had been detained, not arrested, not executed, just isolated. Measured. Because the boss wasn't reacting with rage. He was calculating. The nurse laid the baby down on a worn leather couch. For the first time since the chaos began, the child was completely calm. No crying. No rapid breathing. Just stillness. As if this place felt familiar. That unsettled her more than anything. The boss ended the call. "They're sending it now," he said. Minutes later, an encrypted file arrived. He opened it without expression. "Read once." Then again. The silence in the room deepened. The nurse felt it before he spoke. "The results don't match," he said finally. Her heart dropped. "What do you mean?" He turned the screen toward her. The DNA confirmed the child was the mother's, but only a partial match to him. Not enough to deny relation, but not enough to confirm it fully either. "There's contamination?" she asked quickly. "No." The boss's voice was steady. "According to this, I'm not the only possible father." The air felt like it had been sucked from the room. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Nothing is impossible," he replied coldly. He replayed every detail in his mind. The assassination attempt before the birth. The missing hospital footage. The encrypted override codes. The rival syndicate's symbol in the crib. And now, a fractured bloodline. The nurse looked down at the baby. He was staring directly at the boss. Unblinking. As if waiting. "Could someone have altered the records?" she asked. "Of course." "But why?" The boss's jaw tightened. "Because if the heir isn't unquestionably mine, the empire fractures. Power in the underworld was built on legacy. On bloodlines. On unquestioned succession. If doubt entered the equation, we're followed." Suddenly, the boss's secure phone buzzed again. A message from internal intelligence. The lieutenant was requesting a private call. "He says he knows about the DNA." The nurse's pulse quickened. "How would he know?" The boss answered calmly. "Because he's involved." He accepted the call. The lieutenant's face appeared on the encrypted screen. Bruised. Controlled. But not broken. "You saw it," the lieutenant said. "Yes." The pause. I didn't betray you. The boss didn't respond. The lieutenant continued. The assassination attempt wasn't about you. Then who? It was about the child. Silence. The nurse's fingers tightened around the edge of the couch. The rival syndicate didn't die, the lieutenant said. They disappeared. And before they vanished, their leader made one move you never discovered. What move? He had a relationship. The boss's eyes darkened. With who? The lieutenant hesitated. With your wife. The words hit like a silent explosion. That's a lie, the nurse breathed. The lieutenant shook his head. The rival leader suspected you'd wipe him out. He wanted insurance. If he couldn't defeat you, he'd infect your bloodline. The boss's expression didn't change. But something inside him shifted. You're saying my heir, he began slowly, may carry his blood, the lieutenant finished. The room felt unstable. The nurse looked down at the baby. He was calm. Almost too calm. As if the chaos around him meant nothing. You're manipulating this, the boss said quietly. If I wanted to destroy you, the lieutenant replied, I would have done it years ago. Another message flashed onto the boss's phone. A second DNA confirmation from an independent lab. Same result. Partial match. Uncertain paternity. The nurse felt dread creeping in. If the Empire finds out, she whispered. They won't, the boss said. But even as he said it, gunshots echoed outside the safe house. Closer this time. The rival syndicate wasn't waiting anymore. They were moving. The lieutenant's voice came through urgently. They know you ran the test. They're accelerating. How? The boss demanded. Because someone inside your circle is still feeding them information. The boss's eyes flicked toward the nurse. Just for a fraction of a second. It was enough to hurt. But the baby suddenly let out a sharp cry. The first one since arriving. Not hysterical. Not fearful. Commanding. The boss looked at him. And something terrifying settled into his mind. Whether the child was fully his or not. The Empire already believed he was the heir. And belief was more powerful than biology. Outside, tires screeched. Men shouted. The safe house was being surrounded. The boss drew his weapon calmly. The nurse stood protectively over the child. The lieutenant's final words echoed through the phone. If he carries rival blood, he's either your greatest weapon, gunfire shattered a window, or the Empire's destruction. The call cut out. The boss looked down at the child one last time. The baby stopped crying. Silent again. Watching. Always watching. And in that silence, one question remained unanswered. Was the heir born to rule the Empire, or to end it? Fade to black.